I don't know where you're watching from. Maybe you're scrolling through a late-night feed after a day of feeling invisible. Or maybe you're holding onto a worn piece of clothing that carries 1,000 memories you're too afraid to let go. It doesn't matter the time or place, but today's story, I promise you, will reach deep inside your heart. There was once a young woman named Clara, a waitress in a bustling New York City diner nestled in a corner of Brooklyn, where the aroma of strong coffee mingled with the crisp morning air. Clara's hands were worn and gentle, marked by years of hard work, yet they moved with a quiet grace whenever she poured a cup of black coffee or folded a napkin. Her uniform was simple, her dress old and patched in places, faded by countless washings. The fabric had once been a soft blue, but time and necessity had turned it into something closer to gray, with threads hanging loose at the hem where she'd mended it herself by candlelight in her tiny apartment. Every morning at 5:30, Clara would wake to the sound of garbage trucks rumbling through the narrow streets of Brooklyn. The old radiator in her studio apartment would clank and hiss, fighting against the New York winter that seemed to seep through every crack in the building. She would dress carefully, pinning her dark hair back with bobby pins that had lost their grip years ago, and walk the 12 blocks to Moretti's Diner, where she'd worked for the past 3 years. The walk gave her time to prepare herself for the day ahead, the endless stream of customers, the weight of heavy trays, the ache in her feet that would only worsen as the hours passed. But it was in those small details, the frayed hem and faded fabric, that her story silently waited. Every day, Clara moved through life with unwavering dignity, despite the whispers and sneers that followed her like shadows. Customers often eyed her dress, pointing and mocking under their breath. She should buy a new dress, they'd say, their voices carrying just loud enough for her to hear. How can she keep serving us looking like that? The laughter was cruel, a razor's edge hidden behind polite smiles, cutting deeper than any blade ever could. Yet Clara never let the hurt show. She smiled softly, serving plates filled with homemade meatloaf and mashed potatoes, her eyes distant, carrying the weight of a past she never shared. Her movements were fluid and practiced, born from years of navigating between crowded tables and impatient customers. She knew exactly how to balance 3 plates on her left arm while carrying 2 coffee cups in her right hand, how to slip past the kitchen door when it swung open unexpectedly, how to make herself small and unobtrusive while still being efficient and thorough. The diner itself was a testament to another era. Red vinyl booths with tiers patched with duct tape, a black and white checkered floor that had yellowed with age, and a long counter where regulars sat hunched over their morning coffee and newspapers. The windows were always slightly fogged with steam from the kitchen, and the neon sign outside flickered intermittently, casting an unsteady pink glow onto the sidewalk below. Clara's story wasn't simply about a waitress enduring ridicule. It was about a dream born from hardship and a heart that refused to break. She had come to New York 5 years earlier from a small town in upstate New York, carrying only a battered suitcase and a purse containing $47. Everything she had left in the world after her mother's funeral expenses had been paid. The bus ride to the city had taken 6 hours, and she'd watched the countryside fade into suburbs, then into the concrete maze of the Bronx, her reflection in the window growing more uncertain with each mile. Her mother had been everything to her: cook, teacher, friend, and guardian. They'd lived in a tiny house with peeling paint and a garden full of tomatoes and roses. When the cancer came, it came fast and merciless, eating away at their savings along with her mother's strength. Clara had sold everything, the furniture, her mother's jewelry, even their old car, to pay for treatments that ultimately couldn't save the woman who had raised her alone. The house went to pay the medical bills, leaving Clara with nothing but memories and the worn dress she now wore to work each day, the same dress her mother had sewn for her 16th birthday, when money was tight, but love was abundant. In New York, Clara had found a room in a boarding house in Queens, sharing a bathroom with 5 other women, most of whom worked night shifts and slept during the day. The walls were thin, and she could hear conversations in 3 different languages, babies crying, and television sets playing late into the night, but it was affordable, and more importantly, it was anonymous. Nobody asked questions about where she'd come from or why she was there. The job at Moretti's had been a blessing, even if it didn't always feel like one. Joe Moretti, the owner, was a second-generation Italian-American whose father had opened the diner in 1962. Joe was in his 70s now, with thick white hair and hands that shook slightly when he counted the register at the end of each day. He'd hired Clara after a 5-minute conversation, perhaps recognizing something in her quiet desperation that reminded him of his own family's struggles decades earlier. "You work hard, you treat people right, and I'll treat you right," he had said, and he'd kept that promise. He paid her fairly, let her take home leftover food at the end of her shifts, and never asked about the tears he sometimes glimpsed in her eyes during particularly difficult days. The work was demanding. Clara typically worked the morning shift, arriving at 6 to help with breakfast prep and staying until 4 in the afternoon. Her section included 6 tables and 8 counter seats, and during the lunch rush, she might serve more than 100 people in 2 hours. Her feet would swell in her worn shoes, and her lower back would ache from countless hours of bending and lifting. But she learned to find small joys in the routine, the gratitude of an elderly regular when she remembered exactly how he liked his coffee, the smile of a young mother when she brought extra crackers for a fussy toddler, the quiet satisfaction of a job done well despite the circumstances. Nights were long, working the late shift when necessary, but during those quiet evening hours at home, Clara would spread her treasured books across her small table. She discovered the Brooklyn Public Library system soon after arriving in the city, and it became her sanctuary. She would check out books on art history, literature, philosophy, subjects that fed her hungry mind and reminded her that there was a wider world beyond the diner's steamed windows. She read about painters who'd struggled with poverty, writers who'd been rejected countless times before finding success, women throughout history who'd persevered against impossible odds. Sometimes she would sketch in the margins of newspapers or on the backs of order pads, drawing the faces of customers, the way morning light fell across the diner's counter, the intricate patterns she saw in the cracks of the sidewalk during her walk to work. These drawings were her secret, hidden away in a shoebox under her bed, alongside the letters her mother had written her during her last weeks in the hospital. In those letters, her mother had spoken of dreams and possibilities, of the education Clara might pursue, of the life she might build for herself in the big city. "Don't let the world make you small," her mother had written. "You carry within you all the strength of the women who came before you." But in the world that surrounded her at the diner, talent and intelligence weren't always invitation enough. The customers who mocked her appearance didn't know about the books she read or the dreams she harbored. They saw only the faded dress, the tired eyes, the calloused hands that served their food and cleaned their tables. To them, she was invisible in all the ways that mattered, visible only when their coffee needed refilling or their order was delayed. The slights didn't just come from customers. Some of her co-workers, younger women who saw waitressing as temporary work while they pursued acting or modeling careers, sometimes whispered behind her back. They were skeptical of her quiet ambition, dismissive of her gentle nature. "Why waste your talents here?" they'd say, their voices tinged with a mixture of pity and superiority. "No one will notice a waitress with holes in her shoes." They wore their cynicism like armor, protecting themselves from the disappointment of their own deferred dreams by mocking Clara's persistent hope. Clara kept her head down, believing, knowing that her time would come. She'd learned patience from her mother, who had waited tables herself while raising Clara alone, always speaking of better days ahead, even when the electricity was turned off, or they had to choose between buying groceries and paying rent. That same quiet faith now sustained Clara through the hardest moments, when the mockery cut deepest, and the future seemed impossibly distant. But lonely nights and faltering dreams can weigh heavy on even the strongest souls. There were moments when Clara would lie awake in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the city that never slept, Sirens wailing in the distance, voices calling from the street below, the rumble of the subway train that passed near her building every 20 minutes. In those dark hours, doubt would creep in like cold air through a cracked window. She would wonder if her mother had been wrong, if dreams were luxuries she couldn't afford, if she was destined to spend her life serving others while her own aspirations withered away like flowers without sunlight. The morning of what would become a turning point in Clara's life began like any other. She woke to her alarm at 5:30, dressed in the same faded dress she wore 4 days a week, alternating with an equally worn black skirt and white blouse. The October air carried a chill that promised winter's approach, and she wrapped her mother's old cardigan around her shoulders before stepping out into the pre-dawn darkness of Brooklyn. The streets were mostly empty except for delivery trucks and the occasional taxi carrying passengers home from late nights in Manhattan. Clara's footsteps echoed against the buildings as she made her way through neighborhoods where small businesses were just beginning to stir to life. She passed the corner bodega where Mrs. Chen was already arranging fresh flowers outside, the bakery where warm light glowed through steamed windows, the bus stop where a small crowd was gathering for the morning commute into the city. At Moretti's, Clara went through her opening routine with practiced efficiency. She turned on the coffee machines, set up the condiment stations, filled the sugar dispensers, and counted the register. Joe arrived at 6:15, as he had every morning for the past 4 decades, carrying a paper bag containing a sesame bagel and the daily news. He moved slowly but purposefully, a man who'd learned to find satisfaction in routine and consistency. "Morning, Clara," he said, settling behind the register with a grunt. "You sleep okay?" "Yes, Mr. Moretti, thank you." It was the same exchange they had every morning, a small ritual of connection in the midst of their busy lives. The breakfast rush began at 7, and Clara fell into the familiar rhythm of taking orders, pouring coffee, delivering plates of eggs and toast and hash browns. The diner filled with construction workers grabbing quick meals before heading to job sites, office workers nursing hangovers with black coffee and aspirin, elderly residents from the nearby apartment building who came for the company as much as the food. It was during this morning rush that Daniel Morrison first walked through the door, though Clara didn't know his name then. She noticed him, because he seemed out of place. His charcoal gray suit was clearly expensive, tailored to fit his tall frame perfectly. His shoes were polished leather, and his watch caught the light as he moved his hand. But more than his obvious wealth, it was his expression that caught Clara's attention. He looked lost, almost vulnerable, as if he'd wandered into the diner by accident and wasn't sure what to do next. He chose a corner booth, sliding into the red vinyl seat and looking around the diner with curious eyes. When Clara approached with a menu and coffee pot, he looked up at her with startling blue eyes that seemed to see more than most people did. "Good morning," Clara said softly, setting the menu before him and turning over his coffee cup. "Coffee?" "Please." His voice was cultured, with the kind of accent Clara associated with expensive education in Manhattan penthouses. As she poured, he continued to study her face with an intensity that made her slightly uncomfortable. Not in the leering way some customers looked at her, but with genuine curiosity, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Do you need a few minutes with the menu?" Clara asked, preparing to move on to her next table. "Actually," Daniel said, surprising her by continuing the conversation. "What would you recommend? I've never been here before." Clara paused, considering. Most customers didn't ask for her opinion, and when they did, it was usually with condescension, a way of making conversation that emphasized her role as a servant. But Daniel's question seemed sincere. "The pancakes are very good," she said finally. "Mr. Moretti makes them from his grandmother's recipe, and the hash browns are crispy, not greasy like some places. If you're hungry, the breakfast special comes with eggs, toast, and your choice of bacon or sausage." "That sounds perfect. Over easy on the eggs, wheat toast, and bacon." He closed the menu and handed it back to her, their fingers brushing briefly. "And thank you for the recommendation." There was something in his tone that made Clara look at him more carefully. She'd served thousands of customers over the past 3 years, and she'd learned to read them quickly. the impatient businessman checking his phone, the lonely elderly person hoping for conversation, the teenager on a first date trying to impress his companion. But Daniel Morrison didn't fit into any of her usual categories. He seemed genuinely interested in the food, genuinely grateful for her suggestion, genuinely present in a way that most people weren't. As Clara worked through the morning, she found herself glancing toward Daniel's table more often than usual. He ate his breakfast slowly, reading what appeared to be financial documents from a leather briefcase. Occasionally, he would look up and observe the other diners, or watch Clara as she moved between tables. When she refilled his coffee, he thanked her each time, making eye contact in a way that suggested he actually saw her as a person rather than an extension of the furniture. After Daniel left, dropping a $20 bill on a $12 check, Clara found herself thinking about him throughout the rest of her shift. There had been something different about him. Something that cut through the usual customer-server dynamic that defined most of her interactions. But she dismissed the thought as foolishness. Wealthy men didn't notice waitresses, especially waitresses in threadbare dresses and scuffed shoes. She was wrong. Daniel Morrison returned the next morning, and the morning after that, always choosing the same corner booth, always ordering variations of the breakfast special. On his fourth visit, he stayed longer, nursing his coffee while the morning rush died down. When Clara approached to refill his cup, he looked up from his papers with a slight smile. "Clara," he said, reading her name tag. "Is that your real name, or just your work name?" "It's my real name," she said, surprised by the personal question. "Clara Margaret Sullivan. It's a beautiful name. It suits you." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "Can I ask you something? And please feel free to tell me it's none of my business." Clara nodded, curious despite herself. "You seem... I don't know how to put this without sounding presumptuous, but you seem like you're meant for something more than this. Not that there's anything wrong with waiting tables. It's honest work, and you're clearly good at it. But there's something in your eyes, a kind of intelligence and depth that seems, well, underutilized." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, uncertain whether to be flattered or offended. "I like my work," she said quietly. "I like taking care of people." "I'm sure you do, and I'm sure you're very good at it. But that doesn't answer my question, does it?" Daniel's voice was gentle, not pushing, but encouraging her to think about his words. Before Clara could respond, another customer called for her attention, and she excused herself. But Daniel's words stayed with her for the rest of the day, echoing in her mind as she served other customers, as she wiped down tables, as she walked home through the cooling evening air. That night, she pulled out her hidden sketches and looked at them with new eyes. The drawings were good, better than good, actually. They captured not just the physical appearance of her subjects, but something deeper, some essential quality that made each person unique. Her sketch of Mrs. Chen arranging flowers showed not just an elderly Korean woman at work, but a person who found beauty in small daily rituals. Her drawing of Joe counting the register revealed a man carrying the weight of decades of responsibility, finding dignity in honest work. For the first time in months, Clara allowed herself to imagine a different future. Not the vague someday dreams that she'd nursed like candle flames in the darkness, but specific possibilities. Art classes at the community college, a portfolio, maybe even art school, someday, somehow. But dreams require more than imagination. They require resources that Clara didn't have. And as beautiful as Daniel's words had been, they didn't change the practical realities of her life. She still needed to pay rent, buy food, save what little she could for emergencies. The faded dress might offend some customers' sensibilities, but it was clean and functional, and replacing it would mean sacrificing other necessities. Still, something had shifted. Over the following weeks, Daniel continued to visit the diner, and their conversations gradually became longer and more personal. Clara learned that he was 35 years old, that he worked in investment management, that he'd grown up in Connecticut, but had lived in Manhattan for the past decade. His wealth came from a combination of inherited money and successful investments in technology stocks and cryptocurrency, though he spoke of his fortune matter-of-factly, without the ostentatious display that Clara associated with rich people. More importantly, she learned that despite his material success, Daniel carried his own wounds. He'd been married briefly in his 20s to a woman his family had approved of, a society marriage that had ended bitterly when she'd left him for someone with even more money and social status. He spoke of feeling used, of never being certain whether people liked him for himself or for his bank account. His work consumed most of his time, and his social life consisted largely of obligatory business events and charity galas where authenticity was rare. "I've been searching for something real," he told Clara one morning when the diner was nearly empty. "Something genuine in a world that feels increasingly artificial. And I think I found it here, in this place, talking with you." Clara found herself opening up to Daniel in ways she hadn't with anyone since her mother's death. She told him about the small town where she'd grown up, about her mother's strength and gentleness, about the books she read and the sketches she made in secret. She shared her dreams tentatively, afraid they would sound foolish to someone who moved in circles where dreams were backed by trust funds and family connections. But Daniel listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions, encouraging her to believe in possibilities she'd almost forgotten. When she finally showed him a few of her sketches, his reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "Clara, these are extraordinary. You have real talent, not just technical skill, but vision. You see people in ways that most artists spend years learning to see." He studied the drawings carefully, pointing out details that revealed her intuitive understanding of light, composition, and human emotion. "Have you ever thought about formal training?" "Of course I've thought about it," Clara said, trying not to sound bitter. "But art school costs money that I don't have, and I can't risk losing my job here. I need the income." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "What if there was a way to pursue your art without giving up your security? What if someone believed in your talent enough to invest in your education?" Before Clara could respond, the lunch crowd began filtering in, and their conversation was interrupted. But his words planted seeds that grew stronger over the following days. Daniel began bringing Clara art books from his personal collection, expensive volumes filled with reproductions of masterworks by artists she'd only read about. He pointed out techniques and styles, sharing his own knowledge gained from years of collecting and supporting the arts. Their friendship deepened, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Clara began to trust that Daniel saw her as more than just an object of charity or a momentary diversion. And Daniel found in Clara a sincerity and wisdom that had been missing from his life among Manhattan's social elite. But their growing friendship didn't go unnoticed by others at the diner. Some of her co-workers watched Daniel's regular visits with suspicion and envy. Stephanie, a 22-year-old aspiring actress who worked the evening shift, was particularly vocal in her skepticism. "What does a guy like that want with Clara?" she asked loudly enough for Clara to hear. "Designer suit, Rolex watch, probably has a penthouse apartment. You think he comes here for the coffee?" She laughed harshly. "Men like that don't make friends with waitresses. They use them and throw them away." Others joined in the speculation, their comments growing crueler as Clara's unusual relationship with Daniel became the subject of diner gossip. They suggested that she was naive to trust him, that she was setting herself up for heartbreak and humiliation. Some implied that she was somehow manipulating him, playing on his sympathy for financial gain. The gossip hurt more than Clara expected it to. These were people she worked alongside every day, people she'd thought understood her character and integrity. To hear them reduce her friendship with Daniel to ulterior motives felt like a betrayal of the small sense of community she'd found at the diner. Joe Moretti, who'd observed the developing friendship with quiet interest, finally spoke up during one particularly vicious gossip session. "You people got nothing better to talk about than other people's business?" he said sharply. Clara's been working here 3 years, and I never seen her do anything but treat people decent and work hard. Maybe some of you could learn something from that instead of running your mouths." His defense meant more to Clara than he probably realized, but the damage was done. The atmosphere at work became tense and uncomfortable, with some co-workers treating her with cool politeness instead of the casual friendliness they'd shown before. The situation came to a head on a particularly busy Friday morning in November. The diner was packed with the usual breakfast crowd, plus several tables of tourists who'd heard about Moretti's authentic Brooklyn atmosphere. Clara was running between tables, trying to keep up with orders while 2 other servers had called in sick. The stress was showing. She'd already spilled coffee on one table and mixed up orders at another. Daniel was in his usual booth, working on his laptop while nursing his second cup of coffee. He'd offered to leave to free up the table, but Clara had assured him it was fine, grateful for his calm presence in the midst of the chaos. That's when Marcus Webb walked in. Webb was a local food blogger and social media influencer who'd built his following by writing scathing reviews of restaurants, focusing particularly on what he called authentic working-class establishments. He was known for his cruel wit and his ability to destroy small businesses with his viral takedowns. He entered the diner with the confident swagger of someone accustomed to being feared and catered to. Webb chose a table in Clara's section, settling into his seat with theatrical disgust at the worn upholstery. He pulled out his phone immediately, taking photos of the diner's modest decor while making exaggerated faces of dismay for his social media followers. When Clara approached his table, he looked her up and down with obvious disdain, his gaze lingering on her faded dress and scuffed shoes. "Well, well," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "I guess this place really is committed to the authentic working poor aesthetic. Tell me, sweetie, is that dress vintage because it's fashionable or vintage because you can't afford anything from this decade?" The diner fell silent. Clara felt every eye in the room turned toward her, felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising in her chest, but she maintained her composure, her voice steady as she responded. "Good morning. Can I start you off with some coffee?" Webb laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, we're playing the dignified server role? How quaint." He raised his voice even further, addressing the entire diner. "Ladies and gentlemen, behold the authentic Brooklyn dining experience, served by someone who apparently shopped for her uniform at the Salvation Army. I hope the food is better than the presentation, because this is honestly embarrassing." Several customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few pulled out their phones, recognizing Webb and anticipating the viral content he was creating. Clara stood frozen, trapped between the need to maintain her professional demeanor and the crushing weight of public humiliation. That's when Daniel Morrison stood up. His movement was fluid and decisive, and suddenly he was beside Clara's table, his presence filling the space like a shield. "Excuse me," Daniel said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms and million-dollar negotiations. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Daniel Morrison." Webb looked up, clearly recognizing the name. Few people in New York's business and social circles wouldn't know the Morrison family name and fortune. His demeanor shifted immediately, the cruel swagger replaced by fawning deference. "Mr. Morrison, what an unexpected pleasure. I'm Marcus Webb, then maybe you've seen my blog, Webb's World. I was just having a bit of fun with the local color here." "I see." Daniel's tone was arctic. "And you thought it was appropriate to humiliate a hard-working woman for your entertainment." "Well, I mean, it's all part of the authentic experience, isn't it? People expect honest reviews, and honestly, the service here is a bit rustic." Daniel studied Webb with the same calculating gaze Clara had seen him use when reviewing financial documents. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly throughout the silent diner. "Let me explain something to you, Mr. Webb. That woman you just humiliated is Clara Sullivan. She's one of the most intelligent, talented, and genuinely kind people I've ever had the privilege to know. She works harder in a single morning than most people work in a week, and she does it with grace and dignity that someone like you clearly can't comprehend. Your opinion of her dress says nothing about her and everything about your own lack of character." Webb's face flushed red. "Now see here. You can't just—" "I'm not finished." Daniel's voice cut through Webb's protest. "You came here looking for content, something to mock for your followers. But what you found instead was something rare and valuable: authenticity, integrity, genuine human dignity. And because you're too shallow to recognize those qualities, you tried to destroy them." The diner remained silent, every customer riveted by the confrontation. Clara stood beside Daniel, grateful for his defense, but also mortified to be the center of such attention. She could see some customers nodding in agreement, others filming with their phones, still others looking uncomfortable with the dramatic scene unfolding before them. Daniel wasn't finished. "I've eaten at the finest restaurants in New York, Paris, and London. I've been served by people wearing uniforms that cost more than some people make in a month. But I've never received service with more genuine care and attention than I get from Clara every morning when I come here. She remembers how I like my coffee, asks about my work, treats me like a human being rather than a walking credit card. That's something you clearly wouldn't understand." Webb tried to recover, standing up from his table with forced bravado. "Listen, I don't know what your relationship is with her, but I have a right to my opinions, and I have a business to run, and I have resources you couldn't imagine," Daniel replied smoothly. "Resources that include some very good lawyers who specialize in harassment cases, and some very influential friends who could make your little blog disappear faster than you could post your next cruel review. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to Clara sincerely and publicly. Then you're going to leave, and you're going to think very carefully about whether mockery and cruelty are really the legacy you want to build for yourself." The threat was delivered so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that its power was undeniable. Webb looked around the diner, perhaps hoping for support from the other customers, but found only disapproval and disgust. Even those who might have laughed at his initial comments had turned against him in the face of Daniel's defense of Clara. Look, maybe I came on a little strong," Webb mumbled, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean any real harm. It's entertainment, you know?" "An apology," Daniel said firmly. "To Clara. Now." Webb turned toward Clara, his face flushed with embarrassment and resentment. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I'm sorry if my comments upset you. I was just trying to be funny." It wasn't much of an apology, but it was public acknowledgement that he'd been wrong. Clara nodded silently, accepting it with the same grace she'd shown throughout the entire humiliating encounter. Webb grabbed his jacket and hurried toward the door, his exit marked by a few scattered boos and one customer's sarcastic slow clap. As the diner slowly returned to normal conversation, Daniel turned to Clara with concern evident in his eyes. "Are you okay?" Clara nodded, though she was fighting back tears, not of sadness but of overwhelming gratitude and relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Daniel said firmly. "Nobody has the right to treat you that way. Nobody." The incident became the talk of the neighborhood. Despite Webb's social media influence, the story that spread wasn't the one he'd intended to tell. Instead, customers who'd witnessed the confrontation shared their own versions, praising Daniel's defense of Clara and condemning Webb's cruelty. Several food bloggers who'd been critical of Webb's methods used the incident as an opportunity to call for more integrity and kindness in food criticism. But for Clara, the incident marked a turning point in more ways than one. While she was grateful for Daniel's support, the public nature of the confrontation had left her feeling exposed and vulnerable. The idea that her appearance and circumstances had become entertainment for strangers was deeply disturbing. And despite Daniel's good intentions, his intervention had also highlighted the vast differences in their social and economic positions. In the days following Webb's visit, Clara found herself questioning everything about her relationship with Daniel. Was she truly his friend, or was she a charity case, someone he felt obligated to protect and rescue. Had his interest in her art been genuine, or was it the kind of patronizing encouragement wealthy people offered to make themselves feel generous? The questions ate at her, poisoning the natural ease they'd developed over months of conversation. Daniel, perceptive as always, noticed the change immediately. During his next visit to the diner, he asked Clara directly what was troubling her. "That scene the other day," Clara began hesitantly. "I appreciate what you did, I really do. But it made me realize how different our worlds are. You can silence someone like Webb with a few words because you have power and money and connections. I could have worked here for 20 years and never had that kind of influence." "That's exactly why I had to speak up," Daniel said, "because you shouldn't have to face that kind of cruelty alone. But don't you see? That just proves my point. I'm someone who needs to be rescued, someone who can't fight her own battles. Is that really the basis for a friendship? Your wealth and my need?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee while he considered her words. "Is that really what you think this is about?" "I don't know what to think," Clara admitted. "A few months ago I was invisible to people like you. Now, suddenly I'm interesting because I'm a project, something broken that needs fixing. But what happens when you get bored of playing patron to the poor waitress? What happens when helping me stops being entertaining?" The hurt in Daniel's eyes was immediate and obvious. "Clara, you can't honestly believe that's how I see you." "Can I? You talk about investing in my education, about believing in my talent. But let's be honest, this isn't really about me, is it? It's about you feeling good about yourself, feeling like you're making a difference in someone's life. But I'm not a cause, Daniel. I'm not your personal charity project." The words came out harsher than Clara had intended, fueled by weeks of suppressed anxiety and self-doubt. She could see that they'd wounded Daniel, but she couldn't seem to stop herself from continuing. "Maybe Webb was cruel, but at least he was honest about what he saw when he looked at me. You pretend to see something valuable, but it's not really me you're seeing. It's the story you want to tell yourself about helping the deserving poor." Daniel sat back in the booth, his face pale. "You really believe that?" Clara looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I don't know what I believe anymore, but I know that these past few months have been a fantasy, and fantasies always end." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe it would be better if you found somewhere else to have your morning coffee, before one of us gets hurt worse than we already have been." Daniel stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If that's what you want." "It's what needs to happen," Clara said, though the words felt like glass in her throat. Daniel stood up, leaving money on the table for his untouched coffee. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you're wrong about why I value your friendship, but I understand why it's hard to believe that someone could care about you without ulterior motives. I hope someday you'll realize that you deserve better than the way the world has treated you." He walked away without looking back, and Clara felt as if she'd torn something vital from her own chest. But she told herself it was for the best, that she was protecting herself from inevitable disappointment and heartbreak. The days that followed were among the most difficult Clara had experienced since her mother's death. She'd grown accustomed to Daniel's morning visits, to their conversations about books and art and dreams. Without them, her shifts at the diner felt empty and mechanical. She served customers, refilled coffee cups, cleared tables, but the work no longer held even the small satisfactions it once had. Her coworkers noticed the change, and to their credit, most of them seemed to regret their earlier gossip. Stephanie, the aspiring actress who'd been among the most vocal critics of Clara's friendship with Daniel, approached her during a quiet moment on Clara's third Daniel-free morning. "Hey," she said awkwardly, "I wanted to say something about the stuff I said before. About you and that guy." Clara looked up from the table she was wiping down. "It doesn't matter now." "Yeah, it does. I was jealous, okay? Jealous that someone like him was paying attention to you instead of me. I mean, I'm the one trying to break into entertainment. I'm the one who's supposed to be discovered, you know? And here he was, talking to you like you were the most interesting person in the room. Clara stopped wiping and looked at Stephanie directly. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, I guess not. Look, I'm not good at apologies, but I was wrong. Really wrong. And watching him defend you that day, seeing how much he obviously cared about you, I realized I'd been an idiot. Whatever was going on between you two, it was real. And I helped ruin it with my big mouth and my stupid jealousy. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. You didn't ruin anything. I did that all by myself. So why don't you fix it? It's not that simple. Why not? Pride. Clara considered the question. Pride was certainly part of it, the fear of admitting she'd been wrong, the terror of making herself vulnerable again. But there was something deeper, something that went to the core of how she saw herself and her place in the world. Fear, she said finally. Fear that I was right the first time, that I really am just a charity case to him, and fear that even if I was wrong, I have already destroyed whatever we had. Stephanie nodded slowly. Yeah, I get that. But you know what's worse than being wrong about someone's motives? Being wrong and never finding out because you were too scared to take the chance. That evening, Clara walked home through Brooklyn's quiet streets, Stephanie's words echoing in her mind. She'd spent so many years protecting herself from disappointment that she'd forgotten how to recognize genuine care when it was offered. Her mother had taught her to be self-reliant, to depend on her own strength rather than the promises of others. But maybe she'd taken that lesson too far, building walls so high that she couldn't see the good things that tried to reach her. At home in her tiny apartment, Clara pulled out the art books Daniel had lent her. She'd been avoiding them since their fight, unable to bear the reminder of what she'd thrown away. But now she opened them slowly, studying the reproductions of paintings and drawings that had filled her with such hope just weeks before. In the margins of several books she found notes in Daniel's handwriting, comments about technique, observations about emotion and meaning, questions about her own artistic interests. One note, written beside a reproduction of a Degas drawing of a working woman, simply said, "This reminded me of your sketch of Mrs. Chen. You see people with the same honesty and compassion that the great artists had. Never forget that your perspective is valuable." Clara closed the book and sat in the darkness of her small room, finally allowing herself to cry. She cried for her mother, for the loneliness that had driven her to push away the first real friendship she'd had in years, for the dreams that seemed to slip further away with each passing day. But mostly, she cried for Daniel, who'd offered her nothing but kindness and respect, and whom she'd repaid with suspicion and rejection. Over the next several days, Clara found herself composing and discarding dozens of apologies in her mind. She rehearsed conversations she might have with Daniel if he ever returned to the diner, explanations for her behavior that sounded increasingly hollow even to her own ears. She considered calling him, writing him a letter, even visiting his office building downtown. But each possibility seemed to require a kind of courage she wasn't sure she possessed. The opportunity came sooner than she expected, in the most unexpected way possible. On a cold Tuesday morning in December, Clara arrived at work to find Joe Moretti sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee and an expression she'd never seen before. He looked up when she entered, and she could see that something was seriously wrong. "Clara, honey, come sit down. We need to talk." Clara hung up her coat and took the stool beside him, her heart already racing. "What's wrong, Mr. Moretti?" Joe was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee cup. "I got some bad news from my doctor yesterday. Real bad news. The kind you don't come back from, if you know what I mean." Clara felt the floor drop away beneath her. "Oh, Joe, no. 6 months, maybe a year if I'm lucky. Cancer. Started in my lungs, spread to my liver." He spoke matter-of-factly, but Clara could hear the tremor in his voice. "Doctor says it's from all those years of smoking when I was young." "Stupid habit, but you don't think about consequences when you're 20, you know? There must be treatments, options. At my age, with my insurance," Joe shook his head, "even if there were, I'm not sure I'd want to spend my last month sick from chemo. I'd rather go out on my own terms, you know?" Clara struggled to process the news. Joe had been more than just her employer. He'd been a father figure, a source of stability in her chaotic world. The thought of losing him felt overwhelming. "What does this mean for the diner?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "That's what I need to talk to you about. I don't have any family left, nobody to leave the place to. And even if I did, the neighborhood's changing. Rent's going up, property taxes are going through the roof. Small businesses like this one, we're dinosaurs." Clara felt panic rising in her chest. "You're closing?" "End of the year. I'll use what's left of my savings to pay everyone their last paychecks and maybe a little severance. I'm sorry, Clara. I know this place meant something to you." They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the morning light filter through the diner's steamed windows. Clara thought about all the mornings she'd spent here, all the customers she'd served, all the small moments of connection and community that had grown up around simple meals and conversations. The thought of it all disappearing felt like losing her mother all over again. "There's something else," Joe said finally. "That friend of yours, the businessman, he came by yesterday while you were off." Clara's head snapped up. "Daniel, what did he want?" "To talk about you mainly. Asked how you were doing, if you were okay. I told him about the diner closing, about you losing your job. He seemed real concerned." "What did he say?" "Asked if I thought you'd be interested in going back to school. Said he knew some people at Parsons, the art school downtown. Said if you were willing, he might be able to help with tuition, maybe even find you some part-time work to help with living expenses." Clara felt her world tilt on its axis. "He said that? Even after our fight? Honey, I don't know what happened between you two, but that man cares about you. Real caring, not like the kind some men show when they want something from a woman. He spent 20 minutes asking me about your background, your character, your dreams. Not many people take that kind of interest unless it comes from the heart." That afternoon, Clara found herself walking through Manhattan's streets, heading toward the financial district where Daniel's office was located. She'd looked up the address online, although she wasn't entirely sure what she planned to say when she found him. The December air was sharp and cold, turning her breath to vapor as she navigated the crowds of business people hurrying between meetings and appointments. The Morrison Investment Group was housed in a gleaming skyscraper that rose 40 stories above the street. Clara stood on the sidewalk for several minutes, looking up at the building and feeling the vast difference between her world and Daniel's. The lobby was all marble and glass, filled with people in expensive suits, talking into Bluetooth earpieces about deals worth more money than Clara had ever imagined. She almost turned around and walked away. But then she remembered Joe's words about Daniel's concern for her, and Stephanie's advice about taking chances, and her mother's letter about not letting the world make her small. She walked through the glass doors and approached the reception desk. "I'm here to see Daniel Morrison," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect makeup and a designer dress, looked Clara up and down with barely concealed disdain. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I think he'll want to see me. My name is Clara Sullivan." The receptionist picked up her phone and spoke in hushed tones to someone on the other end. Clara couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see surprised expressions crossing the young woman's face. "Mr. Morrison will see you," she said, hanging up the phone. "Take the elevator to the 32nd floor. Someone will meet you there." The elevator ride felt endless, carrying Clara up into a world of wealth and power she'd only imagined. When the doors opened, she was met by a middle-aged woman in a navy blue suit who introduced herself as Daniel's assistant. "Ms. Sullivan, I'm Patricia Wells. Mr. Morrison is finishing up a conference call, but he asked if you'd wait in his office." Clara followed Patricia down a hallway lined with abstract paintings and through a door into an office that was larger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of New York Harbor, and the walls were covered with original artwork that Clara recognized from the books Daniel had lent her. A Picasso sketch hung beside a small Monet, next to photographs of Daniel with various political and business leaders. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" Patricia asked. I'm fine, thank you, Clara said, though she was anything but fine. Being in Daniel's office made their different circumstances undeniably clear. This was his real world, one of power lunches and million-dollar art collections, board meetings, and international investments. What place could a diner waitress possibly have in such a life? She was still staring out the window at the harbor when Daniel entered the office behind her. Clara. She turned to face him, struck again by how handsome he was in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit and silk tie. But more than his appearance, she noticed the wariness in his eyes, the careful distance he maintained as he closed the office door behind him. I heard about Joe, she said, not sure how else to begin. I'm sorry. I know how much that job meant to you. He told me you asked about me, about school. Daniel moved to his desk but didn't sit down, leaning against it casually while keeping his eyes on her face. I did. Parsons has an excellent continuing education program for working adults. It's not cheap, but it's manageable with the right financial support. Why? Clara asked. After what I said to you, why would you still want to help me? Daniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because what you said to me doesn't change who you are or what you're capable of. And because I think you were wrong about my motives, but I understand why you needed to protect yourself. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. I was wrong. About everything. I let my fear make me cruel. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Daniel. You don't need to apologize for being careful with your trust. God knows you have good reasons to be. But I do need to apologize for accusing you of treating me like a charity case. I know that's not who you are, even if it took me way too long to figure it out. Daniel studied her face for a long moment, and Clara could see him weighing her words, deciding whether to believe her change of heart. What changed your mind? Losing you, Clara said simply. Realizing that I'd thrown away the best friendship I'd had in years because I was too scared to believe that someone could value me for who I am rather than what I lack. And Joe's news made me realize that life is too short and too uncertain to waste on pride and fear. And if I offer to help with school again, will you accept it as what it is? A friend investing in another friend's dream? Clara nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. Good, Daniel said, and for the first time since she had entered his office, he smiled. Because I've already spoken to the admissions director at Parsons. If you're interested, they'll review your portfolio for spring admission. And I've found a part-time position at a gallery in Soho. It doesn't pay much, but it would give you experience in the art world and help cover your living expenses. You did all that already? I did all that before our fight. I just wasn't sure you'd ever be willing to accept it. Daniel moved away from his desk and crossed to where Clara was standing by the window. But I need you to understand something. This isn't about me rescuing you or playing patron to a grateful artist. This is about recognizing talent and potential and believing that everyone deserves a chance to pursue their dreams. You would do the same for someone else if you had the resources. Clara looked out at the harbor, watching ferries carry passengers between Manhattan and Staten Island. I've been invisible for so long, I forgot that being seen doesn't always mean being judged. You were never invisible to me, Daniel said quietly. From the first morning I walked into Moretti's, I saw exactly who you are, intelligent, kind, talented, strong. I just had to wait for you to see it too. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the city move below them. Finally, Clara turned to face Daniel directly. If I do this, school, the gallery job, all of it, I want to do it right. I want to earn every opportunity, work for every success. I don't want anyone to be able to say, I didn't deserve what I achieved. That's exactly what I'd expect from you, Daniel said, and what I'd want for you. And I want us to be friends, real friends, equals, regardless of how much money we have or don't have. No more walking on eggshells, no more second-guessing each other's motives. I'd like that very much. Clara extended her hand to Daniel, smiling for the first time in weeks. Partners in crime? Daniel took her hand, shaking it with mock solemnity. Partners in crime. The next 6 months passed in a blur of change and growth for Clara. She applied to Parsons and was accepted for the spring semester, her portfolio of sketches and drawings impressing the review committee with their emotional depth and technical promise. The gallery job in Soho proved to be everything Daniel had promised, an education in the art world that complemented her formal studies and introduced her to artists, collectors, and critics who became both mentors and friends. Living as a student again, after so many years as a full-time worker, required major adjustments. Clara's days were now divided between morning classes at Parsons, afternoon shifts at the gallery, and evening hours spent on assignments and projects. The pace was exhausting but exhilarating. She was finally pursuing the dreams she'd held secret for so many years. Her talent blossomed under professional instruction. Clara discovered that her years of observing people had given her an unusual ability to capture personality and emotion in her portraits. Her professors encouraged her to develop her own style, building on her natural gifts while learning classical techniques and contemporary approaches. Her sketches evolved into paintings. Her simple drawings became complex compositions that revealed new layers of meaning with each viewing. The gallery work provided a different kind of education. Clara learned to talk about art with confidence, to understand the business side of creativity, to recognize the difference between authentic artistic vision and mere commercial appeal. She met artists who'd struggled for decades before finding success, others who'd achieved early fame only to discover that recognition didn't solve life's deeper challenges. Their stories helped her understand that success in art, like success in life, was measured not just by external achievements, but by the satisfaction of following one's authentic path. Her friendship with Daniel deepened during this period, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. They met regularly for coffee, sometimes at expensive Manhattan cafes, other times at simple Brooklyn diners that reminded them both of where their friendship had begun. Daniel introduced Clara to his world gradually, inviting her to gallery openings and cultural events where she met his friends and colleagues. Some were initially skeptical of the former waitress in their midst, but Clara's intelligence and artistic insight quickly won them over. More importantly, Clara introduced Daniel to her world, the Brooklyn neighborhoods where she'd lived and worked, the communities of immigrant families and working-class Americans who formed the backbone of the city's economy but rarely appeared in the society pages. Through Clara's eyes, Daniel began to see beyond the surface of wealth and status to the human stories that gave meaning to success. Their different backgrounds became a source of strength rather than division. Clara's years of struggle had taught her resilience and perspective that many of Daniel's wealthy acquaintances lacked. Daniel's resources and connections opened doors for Clara that might have remained closed for years. Together, they created something neither could have achieved alone, a friendship based on complementary strengths rather than similar circumstances. By the end of her first year at Parsons, Clara had transformed not just as an artist, but as a person. The quiet waitress who'd once hidden her dreams behind a faded dress had become a confident art student who spoke up in class discussions and challenged both professors and fellow students with her insights. Her portfolio grew to include paintings and drawings that captured the dignity of working people, the beauty of ordinary moments, the complex emotions that defined human experience. Her professors began recommending her for competitive programs and prestigious exhibitions. Gallery owners who'd initially hired her as part-time help started asking about her own work. Art critics who met her at openings began following her career with interest. Clara was becoming not just an art student, but an emerging artist with her own voice and vision. The transformation culminated in a moment that neither Clara nor Daniel could have predicted. The Metropolitan Museum of Art announced a new exhibition called Hidden Voices, Working Artists, Working Lives, featuring contemporary artists who'd emerged from blue-collar backgrounds to find success in the art world. The exhibition was designed to challenge stereotypes about who could be an artist and what kinds of stories deserve to be told through art. When the exhibition's curator approached Clara about including her work, she was stunned. Her paintings would hang in the same museum where she'd once wandered as a struggling waitress, dreaming of someday seeing her work displayed alongside the masters she admired. The irony wasn't lost on her. The girl who'd once been mocked for her appearance would now be celebrated for her vision. The opening night of Hidden Voices was a triumph that exceeded everyone's expectations. The exhibition drew massive crowds and widespread media attention, with Clara's paintings receiving particular praise from critics and visitors. Her portrait series, Invisible Labor, paintings of waitresses, janitors, construction workers, and other service employees, was hailed as a powerful statement about dignity and respect for all forms of work. Daniel stood in the crowded museum gallery that night, watching Clara discuss her work with journalists and collectors, and felt a pride that had nothing to do with his role in her journey. This was Clara's moment, earned through talent and hard work, representing not just her personal success, but the validation of dreams that society had taught her were impossible. But the evening's most meaningful moment came near the closing of the reception, when Clara found herself standing before one of her own paintings, a portrait of a waitress in a faded dress, serving coffee with quiet dignity despite the indifference of her customers. The painting was based on a sketch she'd made of herself during her darkest days at Moretti's, but transformed through her artistic growth into something universal and powerful. An elderly woman approached Clara as she stood before the painting, tears visible in her eyes. "Excuse me, are you the artist?" "Yes," Clara said softly. "I wanted to thank you. I've been a waitress for 37 years, and I've never seen my work honored like this. I've never seen myself in a museum before. This painting, it makes me feel seen. It makes me feel like what I do matters." Clara embraced the stranger, both women crying as they shared a moment of recognition and validation. Around them, the museum buzzed with conversations about art and politics, about society and culture, about the stories that deserve to be told and the voices that deserve to be heard. Later that evening, as the reception wound down and the crowds began to thin, Clara and Daniel found themselves alone in the gallery for a few quiet moments. They stood side by side, looking at Clara's paintings displayed under perfect museum lighting, surrounded by the kind of respectful attention that great art commands. "Do you remember that morning when you first asked me about my dreams?" Clara asked, her voice soft with emotion. "I remember thinking you were meant for something bigger than that diner," Daniel replied, "but I never imagined anything like this." "Neither did I. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't walked into Moretti's that day. If you hadn't seen something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Daniel considered her words carefully before responding. "I think you would have found your way eventually. Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe the path would have been different. But talent like yours doesn't stay hidden forever. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time to offer some help." Clara smiled, remembering their early conversations about charity and friendship, about pride and vulnerability. "Maybe, but I'm grateful it happened the way it did. I'm grateful for your friendship, for your belief in me even when I didn't believe in myself. And I'm grateful for your friendship too. You changed my life as much as I changed yours, you know. You showed me what authenticity looks like, what it means to live with integrity even when life is difficult. You made me want to be a better person." They walked slowly through the gallery, past Clara's paintings and those of her fellow artists, each telling stories of struggle and triumph, of dreams deferred and dreams achieved. The museum was quiet now, the crowds gone, but the art remained, permanent witnesses to the human capacity for transformation and growth. As they reached the museum's exit, Clara paused to look back at the galleries one more time. Somewhere in those rooms, her paintings would remain for the duration of the exhibition. Seen by thousands of visitors who might never have considered the inner lives of the people who served their coffee or cleaned their offices or built their buildings. Her work had become a bridge between worlds, a reminder that dignity and worth weren't determined by job titles or income levels. "What's next?" Daniel asked as they stepped out into the New York night. Clara thought about the question as they walked toward the street. She had another year left in her program at Parsons, gallery representation that was leading to more exhibitions and a growing reputation in the art world. But more than external success, she had something that had been missing from her life for years, a sense of purpose, a feeling that her work mattered, confidence in her own worth. "I want to keep telling stories that need to be told," she said finally. "I want to keep painting the people who get overlooked, who get dismissed, who think their lives don't matter. I want to show the world what I learned from you, that everyone deserves to be seen." They hailed a taxi, and as it carried them through the city streets, Clara looked out at the restaurants and diners, the late-shift workers and early-morning commuters, the millions of people who made New York function through their daily labor. Each one had a story worth telling, dreams worth honoring, dignity worth defending. The girl in the faded dress was gone, replaced by a woman who understood her own value and was determined to use her talents to help others recognize theirs. Clara's journey from invisible waitress to celebrated artist had become more than personal transformation. It had become a testament to the possibility of change, the power of friendship, and the importance of seeing beyond surface appearances to recognize the extraordinary in the ordinary. But Clara's story didn't end with that triumphant night at the Metropolitan Museum. Success, as she was learning, brought its own challenges and responsibilities. In the months following the exhibition, her life changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. Gallery owners competed for her work, collectors bid against each other for her paintings, and art magazines featured her on their covers as an example of the American dream made manifest. The attention was overwhelming at first. Clara, who had spent years trying to remain invisible, suddenly found herself thrust into the spotlight. Reporters wanted to know about her childhood, her mother's illness, her years of struggle as a waitress. Some approached her story with genuine interest and respect, but others seemed more interested in the dramatic narrative than in her actual artistic achievement. They wanted the fairy tale version, the poor girl rescued by the wealthy prince, rather than the more complex reality of talent recognized and nurtured through friendship and hard work. Clara learned to navigate these interviews carefully, always steering conversations back to her art and away from the personal drama that seemed to fascinate the media. She spoke passionately about the dignity of service work, about the intelligence and creativity she'd observed in her fellow waitresses and busboys and dishwashers. She challenged the assumption that artistic talent was somehow incompatible with working-class life, pointing out that some of history's greatest artists had emerged from poverty and hardship. The success also brought financial security for the first time in Clara's adult life. Her paintings were selling for prices that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. She was able to move from her tiny studio apartment to a larger place in a nicer neighborhood, though she chose to remain in Brooklyn rather than relocate to Manhattan's more fashionable art districts. She wanted to stay connected to the communities that had shaped her perspective and continued to inspire her work. With financial stability came the freedom to be more selective about her projects and exhibitions. Clara began turning down opportunities that didn't align with her artistic vision, even when they promised substantial financial rewards. She established a foundation that provided scholarships for working-class students interested in pursuing art education, partnering with community colleges and public universities to identify talented individuals who might otherwise never have the chance to develop their gifts. The foundation became one of Clara's greatest sources of pride. She worked closely with each scholarship recipient, offering mentorship and guidance based on her own experience of navigating between different worlds. Many of the students she supported came from backgrounds similar to her own, immigrants working multiple jobs to support their families, single mothers pursuing education between shifts, young people whose talents had been overlooked by traditional academic institutions. Daniel played an active role in the foundation's work, contributing not just financial support, but also his business expertise and professional networks. Their partnership had evolved beyond friendship into something deeper, a shared commitment to using their resources and influence to create opportunities for others. They worked together seamlessly, their different backgrounds and skills complementing each other perfectly. The Foundation's first major success came 3 years after Clara's breakthrough exhibition. Maria Santos, a young woman from the Bronx who worked nights cleaning office buildings while studying art during the day, won a prestigious national competition with a series of paintings depicting the hidden lives of night shift workers. When Maria accepted her award, she thanked Clara for showing her that someone like her could aspire to be an artist, for proving that talent could emerge from anywhere. Watching Maria's acceptance speech, Clara felt a satisfaction deeper than any she'd experienced from her own artistic achievements. This was what success truly meant, not just personal recognition, but the ability to lift others up, to expand the definition of who could be an artist and what stories deserve to be told. Clara's own artistic practice continued to evolve as well. Her early works had focused primarily on individual portraits, capturing the dignity and strength of working people in their daily lives. But as her technique matured and her vision expanded, she began creating larger, more complex compositions that examined the social and economic systems that shaped people's lives. One of her most ambitious projects was a series of paintings depicting the same urban intersection at different times of day and night, showing how the same space was inhabited by different communities. Morning commuters rushing to corporate jobs, afternoon shoppers and tourists, evening restaurant workers heading to their shifts, late-night cleaning crews maintaining the buildings that would welcome the morning commuters once again. The paintings revealed the interconnected nature of city life, how each person's labor contributed to the functioning of the whole, regardless of whether their contributions were recognized or valued by society. The Intersection series was exhibited at the Whitney Museum, cementing Clara's reputation as an artist whose work transcended simple portraiture to offer profound social commentary. Critics praised the technical mastery of the paintings, but more importantly, they recognized Clara's unique ability to make visible the often overlooked connections between different segments of society. During the Whitney exhibition's opening reception, Clara was approached by Dr. Sarah Jenkins, the dean of a prestigious art school in California. Dr. Jenkins had been following Clara's career with interest and had a proposition that would challenge Clara to think about her future in an entirely new way. "We'd like to offer you a position as a visiting professor," Dr. Jenkins said, "a chance to teach the next generation of artists, to share not just your technical skills, but your perspective on art's role in society. We believe your voice is exactly what our students need to hear." The offer surprised Clara. She'd never considered teaching, had always thought of herself as someone who learned from others rather than someone who had wisdom to impart. But as she reflected on the proposal, she realized that teaching might be the natural next step in her evolution as an artist and advocate. "What would I teach?" Clara asked. "Whatever you want," Dr. Jenkins replied. "We're not looking for someone to teach traditional techniques. We have plenty of instructors who can do that. We're looking for someone who can help our students understand that art isn't just about individual expression, but about connection, about seeing and honoring the humanity in everyone we encounter. You've lived that philosophy, and now you have the opportunity to pass it on." Clara spent several weeks considering the offer. Teaching would mean spending less time on her own artistic practice, at least initially. It would require her to articulate ideas and approaches that had always been intuitive, to translate her experience into lessons that could benefit others. But it also represented an opportunity to amplify her impact, to influence not just through her own work, but through the work of future artists she could mentor and inspire. She discussed the opportunity extensively with Daniel, who encouraged her to seriously consider it. "You've always been a teacher," he pointed out. "Every painting you create teaches people to see differently. This would just be a more direct way of doing what you're already doing." Clara decided to accept the position, but with modifications that would allow her to maintain her connections to New York and to continue her own artistic practice. She would spend one semester each year in California, teaching intensive workshops and seminars, while spending the rest of her time in New York working on her art and managing her foundation. Her first semester of teaching proved to be as transformative for Clara as it was for her students. The young artists she worked with came from diverse backgrounds, but many had been taught to see art as a purely aesthetic pursuit, divorced from social and political concerns. Clara challenged them to look beyond the art world's traditional subjects and to find inspiration in the lives of ordinary people around them. She assigned projects that took students out of the studio and into their communities. They were required to spend time with people whose work was typically invisible: janitors, food service workers, landscapers, child care providers, and to create art that honored these individuals' contributions to society. The results were remarkable. Students who had previously focused on abstract concepts began creating works of startling emotional power and social relevance. One student, Jennifer Kim, created a series of photographs and accompanying interviews with immigrant women who worked in the garment district, revealing the skilled craftsmanship and artistic sensibility that went into producing mass-market clothing. Another, Marcus Johnson, painted portraits of the men who collected garbage in his neighborhood, capturing not just their physical appearance, but their dignity, their stories, their dreams for their children's futures. Clara watched her students work with pride, seeing in their art the same recognition of human worth that had driven her own artistic development. They were learning to see with what she had come to think of as waitress eyes, the ability to observe people closely, to recognize their individual humanity even in the midst of routine interactions, to understand that everyone had a story worth telling. The teaching experience also pushed Clara to articulate her own artistic philosophy more clearly. In lectures and seminars, she found herself explaining concepts that had always been intuitive, analyzing the technical and emotional elements that made certain works of art powerful and meaningful. This analytical approach fed back into her own practice, making her more intentional about her artistic choices while preserving the emotional authenticity that had always characterized her work. By her third year of teaching, Clara had become one of the most sought-after instructors in the country. Students competed for admission to her workshops, and her influence was evident in the work of a new generation of socially conscious artists. But perhaps more importantly, she had helped to shift the conversation about art's role in society, challenging the assumption that serious art had to be divorced from everyday concerns. The impact of Clara's teaching became evident when several of her former students were selected for a major group exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. The exhibition, titled New Voices: Art and Social Justice in the 21st Century, featured work that directly engaged with contemporary social issues while maintaining the highest standards of artistic excellence. At the exhibition's opening, Clara stood surrounded by work created by her former students, feeling a pride that exceeded anything she'd experienced from her own artistic achievements. These young artists were carrying forward the mission she'd begun, using their talents to illuminate the lives and experiences of people who had been marginalized or overlooked by mainstream society. Jennifer Kim's garment worker portraits hung alongside Marcus Johnson's garbage collector paintings, next to works by other students who had learned to find profound artistic material in unlikely places. The exhibition was both a critical and popular success, drawing praise from critics who recognized the emergence of a new movement in contemporary art. During the exhibition's opening reception, Clara was approached by a young woman she didn't recognize. The woman was well-dressed but nervous, holding a catalog and searching for the right words to begin a conversation. "Ms. Sullivan, I hope you don't mind me interrupting, but I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Sarah Chen, Mrs. Chen's granddaughter. You remember my grandmother from the bodega where you used to live?" Clara's face lit up with recognition and delight. "Of course. How is she?" "She's doing well, thank you. But I wanted to tell you something. A few years ago, my grandmother saw one of your paintings in the newspaper, the one you made of her arranging flowers. She cut out the article and framed it, and it hangs in our kitchen now. She tells everyone who visits about the nice girl who used to buy groceries from her and who became a famous artist. But more than that, she says you saw her when other people just saw an old woman working in a store. Sarah paused, emotion evident in her voice. I'm a social worker now, and every day I try to see people the way you saw my grandmother. Not just their circumstances, but their dignity, their individual worth. Your art taught me that seeing people clearly is one of the most important things we can do for each other. Clara felt tears in her eyes as she embraced Sarah Chen. This was the true measure of her success, not the exhibitions or the reviews or the prices her paintings commanded, but the ripple effects of recognition and respect spreading outward through countless individual interactions. As the evening progressed, Clara found herself in conversation with many people whose lives had been touched by her work in various ways. There was the museum security guard who told her that her paintings had made him feel proud of his own working-class background for the first time. There was the young teacher who had used Clara's art to help her students understand the importance of treating all people with respect, regardless of their job or social status. There was the businessman who said that Clara's example had inspired him to start a program providing scholarships for working adults to pursue higher education. Each conversation reinforced Clara's understanding that art's power extended far beyond galleries and museums. Her paintings had become catalysts for thousands of individual moments of recognition and connection, small but significant shifts in how people saw themselves and others. Late in the evening, as the reception was winding down, Clara and Daniel found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the museum. They watched the last visitors examining the artwork, reading the wall texts, discussing what they'd seen with friends and family. Do you remember that conversation we had years ago about what success would look like for you? Daniel asked. Clara nodded. I think I said something about wanting to paint the people who get overlooked. You've done that. But you've also done something more. You've taught other people to see those same individuals with dignity and respect. You've changed how we think about value and worth in ways that extend far beyond the art world. Clara considered his words as she looked around the museum, at the work of her former students, at the diverse crowd of visitors who had come to engage with art that challenged them to see their world differently. I think I'm just getting started, she said finally. There are so many more stories to tell, so many more people who deserve to be seen. And now I have help, all these young artists who are carrying this mission forward in their own unique ways. As they prepared to leave the museum, Clara paused one more time before Jennifer Kim's portraits of the garment workers. The paintings reminded her of her own early sketches of Mrs. Chen and Joe Moretti and all the other people she'd encountered during her years as a waitress. But where her work had emerged from personal experience and individual observation, these new pieces represented something more systematic and intentional, a movement of artists committed to documenting and honoring the lives of working people. You know, Clara said to Daniel as they walked toward the museum's exit, I think we're witnessing the beginning of something important, not just in art, but in how our society thinks about work and dignity and human worth. These young artists are going to create change that extends far beyond anything I could have accomplished alone. Daniel smiled, remembering the shy waitress he'd first met at Moretti's diner, comparing her to the confident artist and teacher she'd become. You started something that's bigger than you now. That's the mark of truly meaningful work. Outside the museum, New York streets buzzed with their usual late-night energy. Clara looked around at the city that had been both challenge and inspiration throughout her journey. Street vendors were closing up their stands, restaurant workers were ending their shifts, security guards were beginning their night patrols. Each person represented a potential story, a life worthy of attention and respect. Clara's transformation from invisible waitress to celebrated artist was complete, but her mission was far from over. In teaching others to see with compassion and dignity, in creating art that honored the contributions of all people regardless of their social status, in building institutions that would continue her work long after she was gone. Clara had found a purpose that transcended personal success. The girl in the faded dress lived on in every painting that captured a working person's dignity, in every student who learned to find artistic inspiration in unlikely places, in every viewer who left one of Clara's exhibitions with a changed perspective on the people they encountered in their daily lives. And you, have you ever been overlooked, judged for something as simple as how you dressed or where you worked? Have you served others with grace and dignity, only to be treated as if you were invisible? Have you carried dreams in your heart while the world told you to be realistic, to accept your place, to stop reaching for something better? Clara's story is a reminder that worth isn't determined by wealth or status, that talent can bloom in the most unexpected places, that transformation is possible at any stage of life. It's a story about the courage to accept help when it's genuinely offered, the wisdom to recognize authentic friendship, and the strength to pursue dreams even when they seem impossible. But more than that, it's a story about the responsibility that comes with success and recognition. Clara's journey didn't end when she achieved her personal dreams. It evolved into something larger, a commitment to ensuring that others would have the opportunities she'd fought so hard to create for herself. If Clara's journey touched your heart, if you see yourself in her struggles or her triumphs, I hope you'll share this story with someone who needs to remember that they are seen, that they matter, that their dreams are worth pursuing. Leave a comment telling us about your own dreams, the ones you're chasing and the ones you've been afraid to admit even to yourself. Like and subscribe, so this message of hope and dignity can reach others who might need to hear it today. For more stories that celebrate the extraordinary and the ordinary, the power of friendship to transform lives, and the importance of never giving up on your dreams, you'll find our podcast linked on the left. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey, for believing in the power of dreams, and for recognizing that every person you meet, from the CEO in the corner office to the waitress serving your coffee, has a story worth knowing and a life worth honoring. Until our next story, remember, you are seen, you are valued, and your dreams matter more than you know. But also remember that the greatest dreams are those that extend beyond ourselves, that lift others up, and create opportunities for future generations to pursue their own paths to fulfillment and recognition. In a world that often judges by appearances and circumstances, be the person who sees beyond the surface to recognize the extraordinary potential that exists in every human being you encounter.